Today we're looking at the issue of online piracy, and joining me to discuss is Justine Munsey, who's a partner at Addison's. Justine, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, of course, Justine, the government has released its paper looking into the issue of copyright infringement and how to tackle it. What approach does the paper recommend?
Well, the paper sort of has three ideas. The big one is changing the authorisation provisions and putting a focus on what are reasonable steps that ISPs and other people should be taking to prevent infringement. The second one is extending the safe harbour provisions so that other service providers can take advantage of them, not just carriage service providers that are catered for at the moment. And the third is to consider introducing a right for rights holders to apply for injunctions to stop online sites overseas whose dominant purpose is piracy, to block them from providing access in Australia.
And Justine, just to clarify, is it a case that the government will be looking to take one of the different proposals, or will it be taking all three?
So they're the three proposals on the table, and they're really done as a package, and it's meant to be one in particular, the extending the authorisation provisions, I think is meant to be as a trade-off for extending safe harbour. So people are going to be liable for authorising copyright, especially ISPs, but they're extending the safe harbour provisions, those provisions which provide for notice and takedown procedures more in line with the US. So you might be liable, but if you send out notices and take down and stop access, then you won't actually be liable to an infringement action.
And Justine, the proposal of course differs to the High Court decision in the iiNet case, which found that ISPs could not be found liable for the infringement of their customers.
Yeah, they're not liable in most cases, and certainly in that case, but this is what the paper is very much about. The High Court said that the legislation that we have is really going to work against ISPs, so this is what we propose to do about it. And it's changing the way that you look at authorisation to make the focus on what are the reasonable steps that ISPs and others can and should be taking to stop online infringement. And it's going to put the focus on those service providers to make sure that online infringement doesn't apply. And there's a whole range of things that could be done and are going to be considered, and all of the submissions have suggested different things, but the focus is on what is done on overseas, a graduated approach. So if a rights holder tells an ISP someone's infringing my copyright, the ISP might need to send a letter out to warn them, and then a second letter, and then escalate to a third letter, and by the time you get to the fourth letter, they're looking at things like, should the ISP cut off the user altogether? Should they slow their speed? All of those sorts of things. So within that idea of response and graduated response, there's a whole range of things that the government have asked everybody to make submissions on, and what should we be doing in that regard.
And Justine, if the government does amend the copyright laws in this way, are there broader implications than just requiring ISPs to take action?
Yeah, well, that's been one of the responses, that the focus is not just on ISPs. The proposed change is technology neutral. So it applies not only to ISPs like Telstra, for example, but anybody who provides access to the internet. And there's been a lot of submissions by organisations such as the universities, who of course provide internet access to their lecturers, to their students, saying, hang on a minute, we also provide access. You can't expect us to be part of this scheme, which will cost us a lot of money, which will actually be making us enforce laws against people to whom we owe duties as well, and has great implications for education and research and things like that. Yeah, so at the moment, it is something that the focus is clearly on ISPs because the motivation is coming out of the iiNet case. But it will, by implication, at the moment, catch a whole lot of other service providers.
And Justine, what's your take on the proposal? Do you think the government should be amending the principles around authorisation in this way, or is there another way forward?
Look, it's difficult. I think that it's a two-pronged process. That yes, something should be done to increased responsibility of people who provide access to the internet, but it very much has to be done hand in hand with providing Australian consumers with access and reasonably priced access to content. I mean, when you look at Australia, there's no doubt that Australians are up at the top of the piracy tree in the world. There is also no doubt that Australians pay more for their content and it takes them longer to get access to it. And so I think that it's hard to legislate. You can't make Hollywood studios provide us with fast, cheap access, but it has to be seen as a hand-in-hand thing, and everybody needs to be working together. So, and that's, as I said, that's hard to legislate for, but everybody has to realise the advantages that will come if Australians. The studies show that Australians will pay for content. But when they can't get it when they want it, they will simply download it some other way.
Yeah, it certainly does make sense. Justine, thank you so much for your time today.
It's a pleasure.